What's up, you guys? Welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Transport. I hope you're having a fantastic day. Today's topic is going to be evolution of cars. But before we jump into the video, let's roll that intro. Oh, cars. We see them everywhere these days. They've become a crucial part of our lives. They are our silent companions and witnesses to our daily lives. They help us with various things on a daily basis, such as getting groceries, delivering essential building supplies, giving your friends and family a ride, and carrying us into new and exciting parts of the world. Yet it seems that we're so engulfed in our day-to-day routine that we have inadvertently forgotten what the cars have evolved from. In this video, we will start from the beginning. I will walk you through a steam-powered era, followed by an evolution of gas-powered vehicles, and then right to where we are now. So get your snacks ready, it'll be a lengthy one. Disclaimer, there is no way for me to encompass every little detail in the span of this video, so I will be highlighting inventions that I personally think had the greatest effect and impact on evolution of cars. So without further ado, we enter the steam-powered era. While Thomas Newcomen is considered to be the pioneer who invented the first steam engine, and James Watt as someone who improved on the design and made it more widespread in the industrial world, it is now an accepted truth that the very first self-propelled vehicle was a steam-powered car designed by the French inventor Nicolas-Joseph Cugnot in 1769. Effectively, what he built was a steam-powered tractor for transporting very heavy equipment of the time, like cannons. It was neither fast nor reliable, but it could sit 4 passengers. By today's standards, the tractor's performance was laughable. When I said that it wasn't fast, I meant to say that it was slower than average walking pace. Not only that, but the way it operated, it was very inefficient, and boiler needed to be relit every 15 minutes or so. And despite all of those drawbacks and frankly unimpressive speed, the tractor managed to get into the very first recorded motor vehicle accident in 1771 when it accidentally knocked down a stone wall. The poor Cugnot was arrested and convicted of dangerous driving. Oh my god. Speaking of the time though, it was the very early days of the Industrial Revolution. Just to give you a perspective on how long ago this was and how ahead of the time the invention was, let me give you a few examples of what the world looked like at the time. The first commercially successful steam locomotive would not be built until 1812. The French Revolution would not happen for another 20 years. The Atlantic slave trade was at full swing. India was yet to be colonized by the British, and electricity would not become widespread for another 150 years. We're talking about the period known as early modern ages, long before the world that we are familiar with came to be. And this fellow was rolling around on his tractor like it's no one's business. That's akin to someone showing up with a real-life teleportation machine and be like, "What's up?" While Cugnot's design didn't prove to be exactly what he hoped it to be, it certainly sparked the interest in self-propelled vehicles. In 1784, William Murdoch introduced his steam-powered carriage, which was followed by Richard Trethewey in 1801 with his whip named the Puffin Devil. Alongside the steam engine development, such things as the handbrake and multi-speed transmission were introduced as well. Entering 19th century, we can definitely see slow transition from the early steam-powered cars toward gas. That, however, is not to say that the steam-powered cars disappeared. The research and development continued well into the 20th century with the culmination of Double Model E. For now, we are in the early 1800s. Following the destruction and horrors of the Napoleonic Wars, the life in Europe started stabilizing, and with it came the scientific innovation. From the start of the new century to 1860, there were a total of 13 different inventions in pursuit of that perfect internal combustion engine. We see the introduction of the thermodynamic theory, early carburetors, liquid cooling, as well as the power stroke vacuum principle. But it's not until 1860 when we see what effectively is the first gas-fired internal combustion engine. It was developed by a Belgian fella named Jean Lenoir. He proceeded to create his own hydrogen gas-fueled car, which he then drove for 9 kilometers from Paris to Joinville-le-Pont. Why hydrogen gas, you wonder? Early combustion engines had no other fuel alternatives, so inventors had to do with what they had. Liquid gasoline would not be widely used in cars until mid-1870s. However, just like in any industry, there are always pioneers who somehow just make it work. One of such pioneers was Siegfried Marcus, a Jewish-born German inventor who created a liquid fuel internal combustion engine and slapped it onto a handcart, thereby making him the first man to propel a vehicle by means of gasoline. In 1888, Marcus created a car that is now known the second Marcus car. In addition to his gasoline-powered engine, it also used another invention of his, a low-voltage ignition system of the magnetotype. And before we move on, I want to stop for a second and pay tribute to Siegfried Marcus. See, during his lifetime, he was honored as the originator of the motor car, but his place in history was all but erased by the Nazis during World War II. Because Marcus was of Jewish descent, the Nazi propaganda office ordered his work to be destroyed, his name erased from the future textbooks, and his public memorials removed, giving credit instead to the man that most of us have heard of, Carl Benz. Several inventors developed their own vision of practical automobiles with gasoline-powered internal combustion engines in the last 2 decades of the 19th century. For instance, it was a German grocery salesman turned engineer named Nikolaus Otto who created and patented the first 4-stroke gasoline-powered combustion engine in 1876. Carl Benz studied Otto's work and decided that he could do better. It's worth mentioning that by the time Benz created his first automobile, he was already known and respected for creating and patenting the following inventions: the speed regulation system, or aka the throttle, the ignition, the spark plug, the carburetor, the clutch, the gear shift, the water radiator too. Apart from the carburetor, you can still find all of those inventions in modern day cars. So in 1885, Benz introduced his first car to the world. He used a 4-stroke engine of his own design between the rear wheels. The 958cc single-cylinder engine used in that car produced 0.8 horsepower and topped out at roughly 13-16 kilometers an hour. The 1885 version was difficult to control, leading to a collision with the wall during a public demonstration. So over the next 2 years, Benz improved in the design by creating Model 2 and Model 3. Benz's Model 3 made its wide-scale debut to the world in 1889 World's Fair in Paris, which was the very same time when the Eiffel Tower was unveiled. From this moment on, everybody saw the potential of the horseless carriage. The car frenzy got real, very real. In the meantime, about 60 miles southeast of Mannheim, a small independent company founded by Gottlieb Daimler and Wilhelm Maybach was quietly working on creation of their own engine. It would be based on Otto's design, but the dream was to use that engine in as many applications as possible. And they have succeeded. The engine, nicknamed the grandfather clock engine, was first dropped into a bicycle frame, thereby creating the world's first motorcycle. Shortly after that, they've installed that engine into an American-made stagecoach, which ended up being their first automobile. By the start of the 20th century, gasoline engine cars were fast, reliable, and exciting. They were also stupidly expensive. In 1893, Carl Benz's simple Victoria car had a price tag of over $60,000 in today's money, and hardly anyone could afford one. In fact, he sold just 45 of those. Car makers stuck with big, expensive cars, so low and middle class customers stuck with their horses and carts. Then a bold American engineer called Henry Ford came along and decided that things had to be different. Ford loved machines and absolutely hated horses. See, since he was just 14, Ford had 2 life-threatening incidents involving horses. The incidents that nearly cost him his life. That really instilled deep resentment towards horses. So he hatched a simple plan. He'd make the simplest possible horseless carriage, and he'd make it in such enormous quantities in only one color that he could sell it cheaply to a huge number of people. It took him nearly 12 years to get things right. In fact, he made 8 different models named A, B, C, F, N, R, S, and K before he finally came up with the winner, Model T. He launched that car in 1908. It was a car that everyone could afford. Around 15 million Model T Fords were eventually sold, and a delighted and very rich Henry Ford scribbled in his notebook, "The horse is done." See, what set Henry Ford apart was the assembly line. Normally things would get more expensive over time, but Ford's Model T dropped in price from $850 when it was first launched in 1908 to just $260 in 1925. The secret was mass production, making the car from simple and very easy to fit parts in huge quantities. Other car makers used small groups of mechanics to build entire cars very slowly. By 1913, Ford was building cars at his new Highland Park factory in a completely different way, using moving assembly line. Model Ts were gradually assembled on a conveyor that was inching past a series of workers. Each worker was trained to do one thing only, and as they did their job, the car moved on, and the whole car sort of magically came together. The very first year Ford used his assembly line, production of Model Ts leaped from 82,000 to 189,000. By 1923, his River Rouge factory was pumping out over 2 million cars. That factory was comprised of 93 separate buildings, 120 miles of assembly line, conveyors, and 81,000 employees. Since Henry Ford made simple cars that people could afford, the miracle of motor car has spread around the world and changed the face of our planet. From this moment on, we can really see the boom of the automotive industry. The vintage era lasted from the end of World War I in 1918 to the Wall Street crash at the end of 1921. 29. During this period, the front engine car came to dominate, with closed bodies and standardized controls becoming the norm. For instance, in 1919, 90% of the cars sold were open body. By 1929, the 90% of them are closed. Development of the internal combustion engine continued at a rapid pace, with multi-valve and overhead cam engines produced at the high end, with V8, V12, and V16 engines conceived for ultra-rich. In 1919, hydraulic brakes were invented as well, and they were first applied by Duesenberg for their 1921 Model A. In the 1930s, cars were significantly more luxurious than their 1920s counterparts. Constant innovation led to higher sales, safety, and customer satisfaction. Now they included radios and heaters. And as years went by, the body designs got more streamlined as well. Here are some cool examples from that period. 1932 Alfa Romeo 8C2300, 1935 Lagonda Rapier Special, 1937 Adler Trumpf Limousine, 1937 Delage D8 120S Sport 2 Aero Coupe. Whoa. What a name. In 1940s, the automotive industry around the world slowed down significantly because, the war. Due to rearmament, car companies started using cast iron and steel instead of aluminum, and as a result, cars got heavier and bigger. Meanwhile, in Germany, Dr. Ferdinand Porsche was commissioned by Adolf Hitler to create an affordable German version of Ford Model T, a car for the people, and I'm obviously talking about the Volkswagen Beetle. Since the 1940s, over 20 million cars were sold worldwide, and it became one of the most popular cars of the 20th century. The end of the World War II brought cars inspired by planes. Swaggering gas guzzlers were given tail fins like jet fighters and burned practically as much fuel. The automatic transmission became increasingly more popular. In 1953, more than 50% of all new US models were equipped with some sort of automatic transmission. By 1958, that number spiked to over 80%. Cars were now getting power brakes, power steering, power adjusted front seats, power windows, and air conditioning. We also see the rise of popularity in station wagons. The 1950s gave us the sport car enthusiasts such juicy cars as 1954 Trump TR2, 1954 Triumph TR2, 1955 Porsche 550 Spyder, 1956 AC Ace Roadster, 56 Mercedes 300 SL, 57 Corvette, and then 59 Corvette Stingray, and many others. 1960s were characterized by too much power and not enough safety. Sales went through the roof with the introduction of such cars as Ford Mustang, Chevy Camaro, Roadrunner, Dodge Charger, and Challenger. Floor-mounted transmission was getting popular as well. But as the saying goes, give the man enough rope and he'll hang himself. In the US alone, a nationwide death toll raised to about 1,000 deaths per week. So naturally, everyone's attention was on safety. As a result, we see the introduction of the following safety standards. Automakers now had to notify their customers of any safety defects or recalls. Cars are now included in anchorages for shoulder belts and seats. Other things that were introduced are collapsible steering column, the four-way flashers, the standard bumper heights, uniform gear shift patterns, safety standards for tires and rims, rear window defoggers, non-rupturing fuel tanks, and pipes. Here's another fun fact for you all. While Henry Ford pioneered automation in the sense of creating a really efficient workflow, it was in fact General Motors that really took that quantum leap further in 1961 when they introduced the first ever car-making robot at their plant in New Jersey. While motorsports is a whole separate subject on its own that deserves a separate video, if you want to get an idea what the racing scene looked like at the time, go watch Ford vs. Ferrari. It's an amazing movie, truly. 1960s was indeed the era that gave us some of the most iconic cars. Some of the examples include 1964 Aston Martin DB5, 65 Alfa Romeo Giulia 1600 GTA, 66 Ford GT400, Bandini F330, Toyota 2000 GT, Dodge Charger Daytona, Skyline, GTR, Jaguar XKE, and many others. While the heyday of the big power cars continued into the early 1970s, the oil embargo of 1974 really transformed the automotive landscape. Many automakers found themselves facing ever-increasing demand for small, fuel-efficient cars, while also wrestling the foreign imports. The Japanese car companies such as Nissan, Honda, Mazda, and Toyota began to undercut American and European car makers by exporting cheaply made cars to the West. For a time, countries like the United States and Britain fought off these imports. So the Japanese went further and began exporting their entire factories instead. Honda in fact became the first Japanese company to open plants in the United States and Canada in 1980s. Some of the exciting cars made in 1970s include 1973 Lamborghini Countach, 1973 De Tomaso Pantera, 74 Lancia Stratos, 75 911 Turbo, 77 Lotus Esprit, and others. Finally, we are entering the modern era, which is characterized by increased standardization, platform sharing, and use of electronics for both engine management and entertainment systems. All of these measures were introduced to reduce costs and development time. We also see proliferation of front-wheel and all-wheel drive systems, the adoption of the diesel engine and fuel injection, as well as unibody designs with transversely mounted engines. From the 1980s to now, we see the transition to three main body types: the hatchback, the sport utility vehicle, and the sedan, with the last one slowly starting to fade away as well. In the world of globalization, big companies and their brands operate beyond national borders. New cars are expensive to design, so makers in different countries work together to reduce the costs. A Renault made in France might use exactly the same chassis, engine, and bodywork as Nissan made in Japan. Another example of globalization is when one car plant in one country builds vehicles for more than one maker. In the recent decade, electric cars have made a breakthrough comeback. Despite being older than gasoline-powered cars, it has taken them well over a century to catch up properly. And the way things are looking right now with Tesla and other companies jumping on this initiative, the future certainly looks to be electric. So there you have it. If the video has been entertaining and educational, please make sure to hit that like button for YouTube algorithm and consider subscribing to my channel for future videos. See you next time. Bye.